This video is sponsored by KnucklesOX and Snake.
Well, that was ugly, wasn't it? These tittering words slipped sardonically from Elec's lips, as though he were making droll quips at a cocktail party, instead of a decimated battlefield. Though, rather than break the ice as he had seemingly hoped, it only heightens the tension as Bardock and his Z-fighting family looked between where Turles' dying form had just been, and the apparent ally who had shot him in the back. Nonetheless, neither Elec nor his cronies seem overly fazed, with the gangster simply commenting that he knows that must have seemed terribly rude, since at this point he's fully aware how Saiyans do love their little fights. But truth be told, he doesn't think any of them had a chance against Turles in the state he was in, and besides, they have business to discuss, which they obviously cannot do if Bardock dies, or rather dies again. Not finding this half as funny as the Heater siblings appear to, Bardock scowls that it's a bit difficult to have a business discussion when you have a blaster pointed at you, though chuckling in an unconvincing affectation of breeziness. Elec assures him that his people mean the Earth crew no harm, and besides, poor little Gaz as his top enforcer is all tuckered out, to the point he's actually allowing his big brother Oil to carry him for once. And he, Elec, simply had to overheat his high-dollar blaster just to get that cheap shot off, so they're more or less harmless to the Earth and his protectors now. Refusing to take this at face value from the man who shot Muesli, Bardock's eyes flick to inspect the weapon, with a scowl twisting his face the more he looks. Being shrewd enough to notice this, Elec questions if something is not to the scarred Saiyan's liking, with Bardock bluntly stating that he gilded his laser pistol in gold. Smirking proudly, the Heater agrees that it's nice, isn't it? Though shaking his head tersely, Bardock retorts that it's pointless. Gold is a pretty soft metal, so it's more likely to warp from kickback or struck, making it a bad component for a weapon. Not to mention, giving a weapon ornamentation is a waste of time, since its function is to kill, not look impressive. At these words, Elec's eyes flash with amusement, as he succinctly counters that if a weapon looks impressive enough to make an enemy back down, then it need not ever be used to kill. And isn't that better and more efficient? Nodding, the Saiyan Protector agrees this is preferable, but it also needs to be able to kill effectively when should the need arise. Otherwise, it's all style over substance. Though this just earns another titter from Elec, who assures him that his weapon is more than capable of killing whatever he points it at. Just look at poor Turles. For a moment, the air hangs heavy with what has gone both said and unsaid, as well as fairly heavy killing intent, as the two men stare deeply at each other, having gained a greater insight into the other's mindset and philosophy in but a few moments. Though just as quickly as it set in, it abruptly ends, as Elec reverts to his affable demeanor, smiling that what he meant to say is it's more than capable of doing so normally, since right now it's all burnt out, just like he said. Though he must say, he's surprised that Bardock has such a different stance on the tool from his brother, since when he showed this to Turles, he didn't mention the practicalities of gold inlay at all. Instead, jumping directly to the same conclusion about its use as a deterrent. Scathingly, Bardock grunts that he guesses his brother and Elec are birds of a feather then. Though adopting her sardonic pout, the World Broker implores Bardock not to write him off so quickly. Yes, he and Turles had similar styles that allowed them to work well together, but perhaps what he needed all along is someone who could see things from a different angle than him. After all, neither he nor Turles would have ever made that wish in a million years. It is astonishing how Elec can sound impressed, amused, and murderously livid all at the same time as he says this, with the hints at this latter emotion actually causing Bardock to let out a small grim chuckle of his own, as he smirks that he had a feeling that shocked the blue man. Though in that moment, as he looks at the Heater, he is reminded of a different figure, who also liked to weaponize his kin while hiding behind a veil of lies, and how that man's eyes had similarly burned the last time they met. In the very midst of his training, possibly at the worst time the Cricket Man could do so, King Kai interrupts Bardock not long after leaving him to his own devices, in order to experiment with both his new and old techniques. So on the North Kaio's defense, Bardock was not too long ago bothering him and Anon over how boring he was beginning to find his training, as well as his constant request for the Sacred Furnace Guardian Giantess to spar with him. It kind of embarrassingly reminded Bardock of just how bratty Kakarot could get when he really wanted a playmate or entertainment of some kind. Though as Bardock goes to see what the deity wants, he's shocked that this feeling of kinship to his youngest child is made all the more palpable, as standing next to King Kai is another scarred face the Saiyan hasn't seen in well over 20 years. Another face like Turles's he fully believed and even hoped he'd never see again. One which is startlingly like his own, though in contrast, is very obviously a proud denizen of the home for infinite losers. His father, Cognac, who before even giving a greeting, all too suddenly laughs that he's both shocked the Cricket Man wasn't lying about letting him see his kid again, and that Bardock actually let himself be killed by a little brother the two of them once left for dead. Getting over his shock rather quickly, as he remembers that he himself is also dead, Bardock's mood and eager view towards experiencing hell is all too suddenly sour, since for some reason in all this time, he'd kinda just assumed his sperm donor wasn't a respected enough warrior to actually earn a place in even the lowest pit of the afterlife. The younger scarred Saiyan even makes this known to his trainer by barking at King Kai that he'd been asking to visit him, not for yet another twisted family reunion, since in his eyes, Cognac has nothing of worth to offer Bardock for his training. The old deadbeat never did and he never will. In contrast, the older school Saiyan seems unimpressed and bored by his child's yapping, before he finally just hauls off and drives a sucker punch directly into Bardock's chin, knocking him clean off of King Kai's planet and its 10 times gravity, in a show of force which he did not possess when he was alive, as he jokes that he didn't come all this way from hell for his kid to wuss out as he chases after, and begins unloading onto Bardock due to a complete belief and faith that the easiest way for Saiyans to communicate and hash things out is with the language of fists, thus calls for using a savagely reckless flurry of attacks, techniques, and combos, which his time in Tartarus has so tempestuously tempered, all while Bardock does his best to block, evade, or counter them, despite the equally harsh words of his father eating away at his focus. With a barrage of punches and kicks, Cognac asserts how much he realized he's honestly missed having his brats in his life to throw around and toughen up how he sees fit, as if death has offered him some sage appreciation for the joys of parenting, when it's too little, too late. While in contrast, Bardock seems to at first try silently enduring and avoiding this verbal and physical assault, but eventually some of his newly acquired earthling sensibilities begin coming out, with his first truly solid blow against Cognac as a grown man, as Bardock argues that better outlook or not, this was all the older Saiyan was ever good for, and that if he were stronger as a fighter and a father, Turles wouldn't have ended up the way he did. To this, however, Cognac brazenly laughs, even though the vein pulsing on his forehead suggests that this showing a greater love for Turles than even his father has actually does get to Cognac, and so he continues his attack, while growing more irritated with Bardock's seeming disinterest to fight back, spitting on the ground and huffing like a beast that all he ever did was an attempt to raise his voice into proper and respected Saiyan men, like his old man did for him. But this only causes Bardock to spit back that this means Cognac's father was a bastard as well, which only seems to rile the older Saiyan up further, like he actually feels obligated to defend the pride of a grandfather Bardock has never known, and much less has never heard his own father speak highly of. In this growing frustration, Cognac begins showing even more parts and aspects of the fundamental tone and style with which both his children would go on to fight with his grown men, as the older Saiyan man makes use of both Bardock's straightforwardness and earnest determination, as well as Turles' cruel cunning and ruthlessness, resulting in a method of fighting weaponizing ki that could only be described as sloppy, not because of a lack of power or skill, but simply because the old drunk fights with a lacking sense of self-preservation, or even an iota of concern or respect towards his opponents, a mentality which served the veteran low-class soldier quite well in his time in the world of the living, but makes him a far more devastating combatant in this state of undeath, as he accuses Bardock of having somehow gotten even softer than he was as a kid, even trying to remind his eldest child that in comparison to his brother, Bardock is now the only sense of pride Cognac still has left him in his legacy, on account of Turles being a runt of a weakling unworthy of the bloodline, someone who it is only through luck in defacing his pride as a Saiyan that he got to where he apparently is now, as opposed to Bardock, who now simply hangs his head low and needs to return to behaving the way he was raised to if he wants to save that little dirtball of his. But when his son doesn't immediately respond to this either, and instead appears either emotionally overwhelmed at last, or more likely has finally succumbed to all the damage he's taken, the father winds up another huge haymaker, which will hopefully beat this lesson into his favorite kid definitively, though instead of a satisfying blow, it is surprisingly caught and negated by the son rather easily, as he moves to fight back fine, dispassionately showing that despite Cognac's increase in strength and supposedly wisdom from the time in hell, Bardock stands 10 toes down on what he said, and not only disagrees with Cognac, but asserts that both he and Turles have grown far past the bastard. Back in the present, barely a second has passed, as Elec and Bardock continue their own verbal battle, with the topic at hand being Bardock's wish. Having praised its ingenuity, the gangster now has a question: what exactly were the parameters? Since while he has seen some of the consequences, he will need to understand the full scope if they are to use the changing status quo to their advantage. Briefly, considering if he even still wants to take advantage of anything, Bardock looks back to Muesli and Gine, wordlessly seeking their counsel and approval due to the former's dealings with Elec and the latter's honed instincts. And when the pair give genuinely reluctant nods, he reveals that he wished for the revival and well-being of every planet which has been conquered and sold by the Heater crew and those aligned or affiliated with them, with this definition being broad enough to not only revive himself, but also everyone hurt by Turles and even Slug. Still exhibiting that mix of admiration, amusement, and subtle rage, Elec calls this very clever, though he wonders if Bardock considered the knock-on effects of such a wish, since many of those planets were brokered for Frieza, meaning not only is the Heater's little slice of the galaxy in chaos, but so are large swaths of the Frieza Force, survivors, who as they speak are busy re-killing various planetary populaces who have just randomly popped back into existence and are out for revenge. Having a feeling he sees where Elec is going with this, Bardock decides to play dumb, questioning why he's telling him of all people, since he left the Frieza Force years ago and doesn't plan on re-enlisting anytime soon. Though teetering in a very disbelieving manner, the blue-dreaded man retorts that surely the Saiyan can see the opportunity that lies before them, as he created it after all. If they join forces, they can use this period of unrest and uncertainty to strike and depose Frieza once and for all. This is exactly what Bardock had been expecting, though he keenly notes that Elec had failed to mention one key detail: who would step up to fill the power vacuum left in Frieza's wake, with the reluctant spiky-haired hero having a hunch that the Heater clan will be all too happy to take on this burden themselves. However, Bardock doesn't feel like thinking about Grand Galactic Games' succession right now, as there's a matter much closer to home he must deal with first, attending to his dead comrades and regrouping with the survivors, now that it is clear the immediate threat has passed. In a blunt tone, he tells the alien invaders as much, stating that he'll consider their proposition when that's done. And while Elec is not used to having people turned down, or even consider turning down his offers, he does not let this show, instead slyly encouraging the Saiyan to take his time, since he and his siblings will be right here when he's ready to talk. Unable to miss the sinister undertone of that claim, Bardock nonetheless sets to work gathering those who fell in battle and placing them in capsule caskets, so their remains can be respectfully stored. Among the dead, he is saddened to see that pervert devil man actually went down with the hero he always claimed to be, while Kakarot, who has surprisingly joined him in the endeavor, reveals that Kami and Piccolo also died, making the toll of their losses far heavier, and the grief the survivors feel all the more depressing forward, considering just how many of the denizens and protectors of the Earth gathered their individual strands of hope together to pull a victory from the jaws of defeat multiple times, some of whom blatantly had no business involved in a battle with monsters from space, but who interfered nonetheless to provide whatever aid and support possible, no matter how small. Heroes that would easily go unsung were they mourned by heartless Saiyan warriors, space pirates, or Imperial troops who only care for strength, as the dead include names like Pilaf, Puar, Jaco, Tien Shinhan, the Ox King, and Master Shen, all dying in various selfless or consequential ways. Even Raditz solemnly informs his father of the catharsis and understanding Nappa and he came to have, citing his loss as another tragedy as it curated a possible redemption for one of the most war-abused and conquest-obsessed Saiyans to ever step on the battlefield. Soon, the rest of his family do likewise, with the Son Chun Serial clan having a more quiet and somber reunion than they might have hoped for. It is when their grim work is done, and their friends are safely interred at Capsule Corp until a means can be devised to revive their return to Mount Palace, with the place having never felt more like home and a haven from the universe than it does now. Over the days that follow, news reached the heroes of the full global death toll caused by the battle, even with all the civilians who were revived when the Tree of Might's impacts were reversed. As for those who've died since, the question of how to return them is a much harder one, as the Earth's Dragon Balls have all gone inert, with it actually being Minato as the acting guardian, and the officially appointed by Goku, caretaker of Piccolo's egg, has a suggestion, since both the Dragon Balls he was made a steward of, and the ones made by Kami are facsimiles of the original set found on their homeworld planet Namek. If they were to go and gather them, they should be able to revive their lost loved ones, who have begun appearing at the check-in station for either well-deserved peace and rest, or are being directed to meet King Kai for their heroics. But this chance of seeing their friends again serves as a shot in the arm of the heroes, particularly the younger ones like Goku, Raditz, and Granola, all of whom are not yet used to having comrades die, but have become rather experienced seekers of the Dragon Balls, with the trio of brothers therefore volunteering to head up the expedition themselves. Naturally, their parents shut this down immediately, as while the Namekians are said to be a peaceful race, they are not about to send their young sons off into space, and most certainly not while the Heaters are the ones providing the ride, having seen firsthand just how dangerous it can be out there, even without constant treachery and backstabbing. Not even to mention that all three boys are members of reportedly extinct species, which someone like Frieza will be quite tickled to exterminate as a means to make up for the presumably very bad time he's currently having. And speaking of Frieza, while the Heaters have kept to the periphery and not pressed the issue like they promised, Bardock has not been able to fully get his mind off their idea, as while he hates the idea of doing anything a manipulative huckster like Elec proposes, there is truth to the notion that the Frieza Force is more vulnerable than it ever has been, and possibly ever will be again. However, after what they've just gone through, and everyone they've lost, he can't ask his family and friends to sign on for some new galactic crusade against a being who's never affected most of their lives. And even for the ones who he has, and would no doubt want vengeance, it's simply too dangerous, since Frieza and his ilk are monsters who make Turles look like a space kitten in comparison, and they only just managed to pull through against him. Briefly, Bardock thinks his brother, and how despite everything, considering the odds, he's the ally he'd most like to have at his side right now, since if anyone would understand why he feels compelled to do this in spite of the risk, it's him. If only Elec hadn't shot him. since maybe, after finally reconnecting through their fists, they could have made peace like he has with some of his other enemies. Bardock just hopes Turles is alive out there, since even a prick like him deserves better than to die in the cold space, with only that snot-nosed brat of a prince for company. But now isn't the time to think about it, since there is still the matter at hand to decide on, and every second he wastes hemming and hawing is another second Frieza is reconsolidating his power. When looking at it like that, there really is only one option. And so, making his way from Mount Palsy in the dead of night, he returns to the site of his meeting with Elec to inform the rebellious broker that he has come to his decision, but only on the condition that Elec answer a question honestly in order to confirm a suspicion of Bardock's, as well as the strict proviso that he is going alone and that they tell no one of this dealing. Finding this duplicity delicious, as it's hilariously close to the deal he just made with Muesli, Elec agrees to hear out, and as honestly as he can answer this question of the Scarred Saiyans, which is, how many of those fruits have you eaten? As the Saiyan points out that he knew Elec's golden blaster was bullshit, meant to distract him, meaning the trickster businessman has also figured out how to suppress his ki. Pausing for a moment, and seeming appreciation that a Saiyan could piece these things together just through knowledge of warfare and tactics, the Heater can't help but allow a sly smirk to spread across his face. Then, he ensures that his siblings, especially Gas, aren't around or focused enough to eavesdrop on this conversation, being the only thing he can do to suppress his killing intent for Bardock again, since like Frieza, he's come to learn that maintaining these kinds of trump cards' effectiveness is less about how capable they are in game, and more about making sure your opponent never gets the chance to know you have them until it's too late. And so with everything set, the Heater boss, without putting up a front, admits to his new Saiyan partner that he'd honestly lost track a bit ago, and despite how casually this is said, the implication, however, is rather chilling to Bardock, as anyone capable of taking down Turles is a heavy hitter, cheap shot or not, and much more dangerous is the wit and cunning used to hide that strength, the guile to draw attention with a garishly gilded golden blaster, while simply slipping a humble dagger between your opponent's ribs. But despite the risk of teaming up with the Heat Devil he doesn't know against the Frost Devil he does, when Elec ushers Bardock to board his ship and says that they will leave at once, since the longer the man stays, the more likely it is his resolve will waver, Bardock doesn't hesitate. Instead, gruffly, the Scarred Saiyan crosses his arms and assures that won't happen, though as he stoically looks back on the world he's come to love, he's silently entrusted to his family, as they are the ones best suited to protect it, with so many of its most powerful and supportive defenders gone, giving him a sense of security and insurance that the Earth and those precious to him will be safe from all the crazy threats that seem to come after it until he gets back. However, as it turns out, there may be fewer of them doing that than Bardock had anticipated.